the Russian state is orthodox, and orthodoxy presupposes the idea of kind of exceptional purity of faith. And the Russians claim, we have the purity of faith, we are specially favored in the eyes of God, therefore we have mission, and therefore we need to implement this mission by waging a war. And when you have this mission, this idea of messianic exceptionalism, then moral rules don't apply to you.
Hello, and welcome to Faith at the Frontiers, a podcast that confronts challenges to the Christian faith with hope. Today we talk with Father Cyril Hovorun, an Orthodox priest and scholar from the Ukraine. He's an expert in Eastern Christianity and Orthodox political theology. We sit down to talk with him about Russian Christian nationalism, the unique ways that Eastern Orthodox theology is being co-opted by this political movement, and the possibility of theological response. We hope you enjoy.
So in our conversations about Christian nationalism, we've had some focus on Europe and a lot of focus on America, but almost no focus on Russia and Ukraine and what's going on there at the moment and how that relates to Christian nationalism, or whether Christian nationalism is a good way of looking at that problem. So it's a great pleasure to redress that balance by welcoming our guest for today, Father Cyril. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, my pleasure.
What do you understand by nationalism to begin with?
Well, I think it's important to begin with a distinction between national awakening or national self-awareness and nationalism. I think it's not a bad thing to have national self-awareness. It sprang from the Spring of the Nations, so-called Spring of the Nations in the mid-19th century in Europe, when the major empires began collapsing, and some people that emerged from those empires understood themselves as ethnic groups with their identity, with their language, with their culture, with their literature, and so forth. And it was a good thing. Ukraine actually adopted its own national identity in the same period of time when, for example, Italians adopted their identity as Italians, not just, those city-states. Well, even French developed further their French identity.
What sort of time frame are we looking at then?
Yes, it's the middle of the 19th century, basically.
Yeah, okay. So there's the emergence of nation states.
The nation states. At that time, it was a really emancipatory movement, a movement of national awakening, and it was not bad. It was good, and it was really against the imperial states somehow, and it contributed to the development of those nations that emerged from the empires eventually. Those at least who managed to emerge from the empires. Ukraine was a bit delayed with the emergence from the Russian Empire. Actually, Ukraine belonged to two empires at the time: the Austro-Hungarian Habsburg Empire and the Russian Empire.
That must have been awkward and a cause of conflict in some places.
Yes, it was not easy. And no nation had it easy. The kind of struggling for the independence, but many of them managed to get independence and become the nations as we know them nowadays. I would say that even the American nation, somehow emerged in the same period of time. So even the American people were affected by this European trend of the emergence of nations. Well, America emerged from the British Empire, after all.
Yeah, it was our colony gone wrong, I'm supposed to say at this point.
Well, that's another topic.
I shouldn't really say that too much because now I'm living in America, but yeah.
That's right.
Right, it's dangerous indeed. Even more for me because I'm on the American visa. But then things started developing differently, I would say. Some nations that developed their distinct national identity adopted a feeling that they have some kind of exclusivity for their identity. And from the religious perspective, they started seeing themselves as a kind of special in the eyes of God. That's how exceptionalism emerged. And there were different sorts of exceptionalism. Well, there is American exceptionalism, which is very strong, and it's kind of embedded in the American DNA in a sense. But other European nations also had this exceptionalism. Take Germany, for example. Germany started both wars, the World War I and World War II, out of this idea of their own mission, exceptional mission. And actually, especially in the World War I, the Germans believed that they have a mission from God. God to be like God's hammer to smash all those liberal decadence, especially coming from France, and that was one of the reasons, important reasons for the World War One. And then the World War Two came, and when the Germans again had this mission, this idea of their mission of save the world from the Jews. And that's how the Holocaust started. So the Holocaust also stemmed from the idea of exceptionalism. In the Orthodox Church, there were some special cases of exceptions. For example, there was the first Balkan War in 1912, when the Orthodox nations in the Balkans started fighting for their independence from the Ottoman Empire, and most of them managed to.
The Ottoman Empire was Muslim.
Well, it was Muslim, but it had a significant Orthodox population. Actually, the majority of the minority in the Ottoman Empire was Orthodox, and they managed through the Balkan War, first Balkan War, to gain their independence. But soon after that, they started fighting each other as Christian nations, and that's how the Balkan War II started. And then eventually, some scholars say that the Balkan War III started, which developed into the World War One, and some people say that the World War One started as the third Balkan War in the among the Orthodox nations. Take Serbia. Serbia played an important role. All those things happened because of the growth of the national exceptionalism, what can be also called nationalism. So nationalism is different from the national awakening. Nationalism, I believe, it's a bad thing by definition, because nationalism presupposes that I love my nation, I cherish my identity, but I really see my nation as exceptional, as superior to other nations, especially to my neighbors. It's different from the national awakening, when I love my nation, but I also respect other nations. So this is a healthy, I think it's a healthy attitude, when I respect other nations and I treat them, equally, like myself, according to the gospel. But when nations started treating others as inferior, this is really a dangerous thing, and that's how exceptionalism emerges. Exceptionalism can be not just nationalistic; it can also be imperial.
Well, I think there's not as much of a difference between exceptionalism and imperialism the way you've outlined it. Because if you're saying,
Yes, exactly.
my nation is superior, I have a mission to bring my superiority to other nations, you're essentially being imperial in your impulses, right?
Exactly. The only difference is that when we are talking about the national exceptionalism, it applies to one ethnic group. When we talk about the imperial exceptionalism, it applies to a super ethnic group, a group that includes different nations, like take Austro-Hungarian Empire, which at some point became really exceptionalistic as well. And it included different nations like Hungarians, Austrians, and then Czechs and Slovaks and so forth, all those multiple nations in the Eastern Europe. Or take modern Russian state. It's not really nationalistic. What we are talking when we are talking about Putin's state, it's not really a nationalistic case. It's a case of I would call civilizational or imperial or neo-imperial exceptionalism, when they believe the Russian identity, yes, it's important, but it's not everything about Russia. Russia wants to include other ethnic groups, including Ukrainians. And that's how
Right.
Russia claims, Ukraine for itself, because it says that it fights Ukrainian nationalism, meaning national identity, because it wants to include Ukraine to its neo-imperial project, and it claims some kind of exclusivity, exceptionalism for itself. And they believe that this exceptionalism stems from God Himself, because the Russian state is Orthodox, and Orthodoxy presupposes the idea of kind of exceptional purity of faith. And the Russians claim, we have the purity of faith, we are specially favored in the eyes of God, therefore we have mission, and therefore we need to implement this mission by waging a war. And when you have this mission, this idea of messianic exceptionalism, then moral rules don't apply to you. Then you can do whatever you want, because you are exceptional. God has mission for you. The same way how the Germans thought about themselves during the Holocaust and so forth. So it's very similar thing. But there is, again, I want to stress this difference between the imperial or civilizational. Russians call themselves a civilization, not really an empire. It's not Putin's language. Putin's language is the language of the civilization, and they call themselves civilization, which is more embracing, more comprehensive of other ethnic groups, and it's different from national exclusivism or messianism, like for example Serbian exclusivism that drove them to fight their neighbors in the Balkan Wars and to have Srebrenica and the extinction of Croatians and Albanians and so forth. So those are two slightly different things, but the common denominator between them is this idea of exceptionalistic messianic exclusivity, which is dressed in this idea that we are special in the eyes of God, and God wants us to accomplish a special mission.
So you already alluded to the religious dimension of that, especially in the case of Russia. I've read a lot of different reasons given for the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Some give economic reasons, political reasons, strategic reasons. But you seem to be saying that at its heart, it's actually a religious motivation. Is that right?
That's correct. And because it's really difficult to identify a pragmatic, non-religious reason behind the Russian aggression, the only way how it can be kind of rationalized, not justified, rationalized, is through religious dimensions. If you ask Putin himself, why on earth did you start this war? He would really struggle to answer this question. I believe so.
Interesting.
Because if you trace the explanations of the war in the Russian propaganda, in the Russian narratives, it changed all the time. It has changed several times since 2022, February 22. And then the narratives change all the time. With the only exception, there is a kind of perennial religious narrative in those changing narratives, political narratives of Putin and his clique, and they claim that it's the will of God. It's the mission that Russia has to accomplish. They always claim biblical imagery, Jewish people who were called by God to extinguish their neighbors in a very bloody way, in a very merciless way. And they make, theologians who try to justify Putin, there are some court theologians who try to justify war and who are quite close to Putin, or they support the cause of the war. They make many allusions to the Old Testament history of the Jewish people who were endowed by God with this mission or to eliminate all the neighbors. And the Russians say, we play the same role. We play the role of Israel, ancient Israel, who try to, extinguish those Canaanites, meaning Ukrainians, and the rest of the people to the west from Russia.
But how can you? I find it hard to imagine how you can map Russia onto Israel and Ukraine onto Canaan in the way that it happens in the Old Testament. What is it that? Yeah.
It's difficult to really substantiate on the basis of the biblical scholarship, solid biblical scholarship. It's very.
Well, I guess they're not that interested in the pure biblical scholarship.
Well, there are some scholars who are interested, and they try to apply biblical scholarship to just justify Putin's aggression, just as the German scholars in the interwar period tried to justify Holocaust, also by alluding to the Bible. And their point was very similar. They said, look, Jews apostatized from God, and God wanted to punish them, and God chose the German nation to punish, the Jewish apostates. That was and actually very prominent biblical scholars, really top-notch scholars of the time, worked in the universities like Jena University in Germany. They established a special institute to study biblical scholarship to prove the Holocaust cause. And
I remember reading about this. Actually, I read a fascinating book called Before Auschwitz, which was a survey of what theologians were saying.
Actually, good books. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That study the German theology, interwar theology, biblical scholarship, and moreover they even tried to prove that Jesus was not Jewish, that he was Aryan, he was Nordic, and they tried to find different scholarly arguments to that. It doesn't make any sense. It's nonsense, of course, but the best scholars try to say this. Russia
it's a very sobering thought, isn't it? How quickly and easily the world-leading academics can start saying stuff that is obviously driven by a political agenda.
Exactly, absolutely so. And that is exactly what is happening in Russia, when some biblical scholars starting doing the same thing, trying to prove that Russia is like the new Israel and Ukraine are the new Canaanites, and not to say about about the United States, Americans who are like the worst of pagans that you could imagine, that they are so disgusted, in the eyes of God, that Russia has all reasons, all justifications to wage, this global crusade against the West.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really, I find that just fascinating because, on the one hand, once your country has committed to itself to genocide or whatever, like, you don't do people need the justification? They're already just going to do it anyways. But I guess it's like a post hoc justification. But also, like, scholars probably aren't going to be that helpful because neither the politicians nor the general population tends to listen to the scholars.
Well,
so it's interesting that they jump in anyways.
exactly. This is the thing. No one likes to be a murderer. No one likes to be just a killer, just to kill. Maybe Putin likes to kill just for killing, for the sake of killing. But people need some kind of, noble cause, some kind of justification. And the more sacred, the more biblical it is, the more theological it is, the better it is. That's why they really employ the scholarship and theology to justify why they kill people, why they commit genocide, just like the Germans, Nazis did with their own biblical and theological scholarship. So that the best theologians, I would say, of the time sided with the Nazi and tried to find theological and biblical justification for the
But this
war.
gets really complicated because you can have people with religious motivations giving sort of non-religious justifications for it, and you can have vice versa, right? You can have people whose core motivation is they just want to make lots of money, but they put a religious veneer on it. And now I'm hearing two different things right now, that there's religious justifications after the fact that are not the real reason why Russia is invading Ukraine. But then you're also saying the real reason is also religious.
Well, Russia is big, and many people have many different justifications. Even if you take Putin himself, just one person, still you can see. I think he evolved in reasoning about the war, in trying to explain the war to himself. Still, I think I'm quite convinced that he struggles to explain this war to himself, honestly. Whenever he is honest to himself. And he tries different justifications, including theological ones. Well, the war now happens for more than 3 years, and different narratives emerged to explain this war. And again, different groups of the Russians. Some Russians don't care about religious justifications. They just they want to get rid of their mortgage. They want to repay their bank debts, and they go to fight and to kill Ukrainians in order to get rid of their debts. Many Russians do so, but for many, it's not enough. Many want some kind of religious justification, and the church provides them with this justification. And that's where the church steps in and starts playing a major role as a rationalizator, so to say, a justificator of the war on the basis of theological arguments. And this is really a major crime, and I would say a major deadly sin that the church, Russian Orthodox Church, is committing.
So how do they see themselves as being like Israel? I'm genuinely curious.
Well, it has to do with the idea of exceptionalism. Israel was exceptional. We accept it as Christians, right? And as
It's hard to be a Christian and not think that, yeah.
exactly. You can take this exceptionalism in different ways. You can see it as really a hard mission to promote monotheism among the pagans, what the Jewish people did, right? It was really hard to do so. Or you can see it as kind of special favoritism from God that frees you, liberates you from any obligation, any moral bondage. This is a wrong exceptionalism that some European nations were trapped in, like I mentioned, Germans, not just Germans, some other. Take Italians, for example, under Mussolini. They had the same kind of problem. Mussolini also believed in a special mission from God. Mussolini wanted to restore, he wanted to make Roman Empire great again. And he had like this great mission of recreating this Roman Empire, just like Putin wants to make Russia great again, or Holy Rus great again, or like Hitler wanted to make Holy Roman Empire great again. So all of them had this special mission, and Russia is not an exception. Russia is on the same mission, very badly understood exceptionalism. It's a sort of deviation of the very idea of orthodoxy, of the purity of faith. And well, I'm afraid that even America is not really immune from this kind of viruses.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah, I expect so. And is this I one of the distinction that you made between a kind of nationalist exceptionalism and a kind of civilizational or imperial exceptionalism? One of the things I was curious about is, when Russia is doing that, is that a way of saying this civilization is more foundational than these national identities,
Yeah.
and so we're calling these people back to this, right? So it's kind of anti-national. It's not saying this civilization is multicultural and we want to bring all these people
Yeah.
together, right? It's basically saying like whatever is different about us, we need to get rid of, and they need to come under this kind of one. And so it's similar to nationalism in that it's saying like you
Yeah.
should be like this, but it's saying this is broader and more foundational even than nation states
Yeah.
for how Russia conceives of it. Is that right?
That's right, absolutely so. I think it's important also to distinguish between two ideas of civilization. There is a classical ancient Greek idea of civilization that goes back to Herodotus. He actually coined this term of civilization in the wake of the Persian intrusions to Greece. And the Greeks, in order to oppose, to resist the Persians, they invented this idea that we are the civilization and the Persians are barbarians. So that is the original idea of civilization as opposite to the barbarianism.
I remember learning that the word barbarian in Greek originates from the noise a sheep makes, ba ba, because what they're saying is they're
Well,
barbarians. We can't understand them. They just sound like sheep.
yeah. Well, the Greeks certainly tried to describe the Persians pejoratively, and they created an entire mythology of the barbarian Persians. Now we know the modern scholarship understands that the Persians were not as barbarians as the Greek described them, but it's a different story.
Well, if you understand
But
their language, they probably don't sound like sheep anymore. But yeah.
well,
That's right.
yes, that's true. That's also true. And for the Greeks, basically speaking Greek was the main feature of civilization, of being civilized. So those who didn't speak Greek were not civilized. But this is a classical Herodotian kind of concept of civilization. The Russians have adopted a different concept, which emerged in the late 19th, early 20th century, through the works of the historians like Toynbee, for example, and there was a Russian kind of scholar, historian, whose name was Gumilev, who developed the same sort of ideas. They actually claimed that civilization is not what the Greeks meant by civilization. Civilization are huge groups of people, which include different ethnic groups, but they have a common identity. So the nations within the civilization could have their own identities. Like, for example, like Armenians or Syrians could have their own identity within the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman civilization. But there was kind of a common denominator or an overarching identity, imperial identity or civilization identity, which is not necessarily imperial. It does not. Well, it can be an empire. I mean, civilization can be an empire, but can be other things. And Putin actually claims that modern Russia is not really an empire, even though many people, and I, including myself, believe he tries to build a new empire, but he doesn't call it empire, he calls it civilization. And this is the language he adopted actually from Patriarch Kirill, from his body in this symphonic relationship with the church. And this idea goes back to the historians of the early 20th century that started describing those civilization. And then Samuel Huntington came from Harvard, and he said that yes, we can speak about civilizations, and there will be a clash of civilizations that will succeed the clash of ideologies. And basically,
did he identify what Arabia, China, and the West or
but
something
not
like
Russia.
that?
Actually, he never included Russia as envisaged
Oh,
Russia
and now
as.
Russia's getting its revenge. Huh? Yeah.
Yes, and Russia invented itself as a civilization in a very Huntingtonian sense, in the terms of Huntington. And I remember very well Patriarch Kirill being absolutely fascinated by Huntington and his concept of the clash of civilizations. And actually, Huntington was somehow right in the sense that after the Cold War, when there was a clash of ideologies, and then the clash stopped, and Huntington predicted a new sort of clash on the basis of identities. And not just ethnic identities, not just ethnic wars. This sort of kind of Balkan or mostly Balkan wars that Europe had, but larger wars, larger scale wars, and that's exactly what Putin tries to enact. Putin is fascinated by history, even though he's a very amateurish in his history. He's not really a good historian, and he is fascinated by enacting history. All those Vikings or knights that gather in the summertime to pretend to fight each other. Putin is like them, except that he really kills people. His enactment of history is real. So he enacts some ideas that emerged a long time ago, including the idea of civilization, and he, in his own eyes, he conducts this kind of civilizational campaign for the Russian civilization, and he uses this language of the exceptional Russian civilization that he tries to. He believes it's really exceptional, and it has to do with God's favor and some God's mission.
And so we've been talking a lot about Christian nationalism, and I think in some way this is a cousin to that, but it's being conceptualized in some slightly different ways, and also drawing then on particularly the kind of Eastern Orthodox tradition to do that, whereas most of the other ones we've talked about are kind of drawing on Western Christendom or Protestant kind of theology. Do you feel like is there anything particular about the coming from kind of Eastern Orthodoxy?
Yes, the Russian Orthodox civilization exceptionalism is different, quite different from the American exceptionalism. Well, American exceptionalism, if we want to analyze it a bit, it may help us to understand the Russian one. It comes, I believe, it comes from rooted, and again, I don't want to be misjudging any tradition, but it's very close to Calvinism, with the idea of predestination, with the idea of almost lack of synergy, between human beings and God in humans' own salvation, and in in the accomplishing mission. So it's the mission is almost given. I mean, the goal of the mission and the results of the American mission, they're almost given, and like predestined by God. It's not that we choose; we just take on that mission and we carry out. The Russians have a different attitude. It comes from orthodoxy, where on the one hand, the feeling of synergy is quite strong. The kind of relationship between human beings and God. They need to work together in order to accomplish a mission. And Putin really tries hard. He acts as a major actor of history. At least that's how he sees himself. It's not that God grants him whatever he wants to achieve. He needs to work hard, and he does. At the same time, Eastern Orthodoxy has this idea of a symphony, the symphonic relationship between the church and the state, which presupposes that only elites are bestowed with a special mission. People don't matter. Elites matter. Political elites, political establishment matters. That's why Putin just disregards what ordinary Russians think or do. He believes it's very elitistic, and actually Patriarch Kirill also is very elitistic. He also believes in the power of the elites. He doesn't believe in the power of the people. Well, the Russians, don't have this American mentality. We are the people. Well, they have, in a sense, they can say we are the people, Putin and his clique, in the sense that Putin and my friends are the people, not the rest of the people.
They're the only people who really matter, yeah.
They don't matter. The rest of the people don't matter. And they believe that they have special relationship, with God. They need to work hard to achieve their goals. And that is their driving force in accomplishing their mission as they envisage it. And that is the difference I believe, with the American kind of, with the American attitude, exceptionalism.
What's your sense of how widespread this view is within the Russian Orthodox Church? Are most Russian Orthodox on board with this? Or do you know?
Yeah, I believe so. Moreover, I would say that the Russian Orthodox Church is the protagonist of this kind of thinking and this kind of philosophy/theology. Moreover, I am afraid that after Putin falls, and it will happen inevitably, he's not eternal, even though he believes that he will live until 150 years or so. That is one of his crazy ideas. But he will die eventually. And after he dies, I'm afraid Putinism will survive. And I'm afraid that the church will be the main vessel for Putinism to continue after Putin. So that is a difference between like Russia and Germany, the German situation. After the World War II, when Germany was liberated from Nazism, some methods and techniques were applied to the German, so to say, psyche, German people, how to heal people from this malady, from this kind of madness that they had. And some psychiatric methods of the time were applied and those methods were especially popular in the United States, and they were imported to Germany from the United States. They essentially presuppose that you need to find a relatively healthy spot in the brain, a damaged brain, and then to try to expand this healthy spot, relatively healthy spot on the entire brain. So that was the technique that some kind of wise Americans applied to Germany, and they found the church as a relatively kind of healthy spot in the German nation, in the German
Did
psyche.
they? In spite of all those theologians who argued for...
Yes, but because there was confessing church, because there were many like Bonhoeffer, other German theologians and people who did not support. I mean, relatively healthy, because the entire nation was completely affected by Nazism, and it was really hard to find something healthy. And the church was not healthy, but it was healthier than the rest, so to say. And that's why they made a kind of Germany part of the German constitution after the World War II. They make religious schooling constitutional. You cannot get rid of it without changing constitution, so forth. It was a part of this agenda, as it were. And it worked well, because the church, even though it had been affected by Nazism, contributed to healing the German nation from the malady of Nazism. I think it will not happen with the Russian church, because the Russian church is not a healthier part of the Russian psyche, Russian society. It is probably the sickest part of the Russian psyche, and you cannot do the same after Putinism somehow vanishes or will be challenged after death of Putin, whatever happens to him. I'm afraid that we could not do the same trick with the Russian church in Russia as the Americans did with the German church in Germany, because unfortunately the church is really profoundly affected by Putinism, by this ideology, because the church is one of the generators, one of the inventors of Putinism.
So what would you want to do, speaking from within the Orthodox Church, as an Orthodox priest yourself, how would you want to try and combat this, what you see as a sort of disease in the Russian Orthodox Church?
Yeah. Well, I believe there are two ways. First of all, it's a way of secularism, just to ignore religion, because religion had produced problems. Let us just forget about religion, just ban religion, whatever. Adopt a very kind of strict secularism. Some people, some European intellectuals after the World War II adopted exactly this approach, because religion was compromised. They decided it's better to get rid of religion. That's how this wave of secularism started in
I assume
Europe.
that's not the approach that you would want to take.
But that's exactly that's my point. There is a second way, and I believe the second way is to challenge these deviations of theology theologically. I think it needs this sort of theology, unhealthy, really poisonous and toxic theology, needs to be deconstructed, needs to be challenged on the basis, on the theological premises, on the premises of our own tradition. You cannot, and that's another thing, that, well, Orthodoxy has produced this kind of deviation, and you cannot use other theological traditions to heal this tradition. So you need to use the resources of Orthodoxy. And I believe we have plenty of resources, indeed, in our past, in our tradition, that may help us to get rid of this sort of deviation, of this sort of heresy. I call it heresy, in a very full sense of the word. And we have all the resources in our tradition to challenge this heresy and to get rid of it.
So where would you point to, in just 2 minutes, where would you get started on the resources that can combat this heresy?
Well, we have started it already. There is
okay.
There is an effort, and it continues when groups of theologians, Orthodox theologians, but not only Orthodox. We really need support of other traditions as well, and it needs to be really an ecumenical effort, not just confessional. But main work needs to be done by the Orthodox theologians, of course, because we know our tradition better, and we know the diseases, the kind of weaknesses of our tradition better than others. Which does mean that we need to do it just on our own. We need to reach out to other theologians, other groups, and it needs to be really an ecumenical effort. And it's happening already. There are groups of theologians across confessions, across traditions that think how to deal with this, basically, I call it a fascist ideology of the Russian world, which is promoted by the church and by the Kremlin, how to deal with it theologically, how to deconstruct it on the theological premises, and how to substitute, how to create something healthier to substitute this unhealthy theology.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that I think is really interesting if comparing with the U.S., right? If, we have certain types of Christians that are, have been fully supportive from the pulpit of our current leader, who's really allied with Putin at the moment, and but they don't have a coherent theological tradition that they're coming out of, and I think that's been one of the things in thinking about how to respond, and also about how easy it has been for them to sort of move largely completely away from anything historically Christian. It's just a purely political kind of ideology.
I completely agree. I try to study also the sort of theology and ideology behind MAGA ideology, and I use the methods that I applied to study Putinism, basically, and I find the methods to study Putinism helpful to study MAGA ideology or theology / theology, and I think there are some really similarities between the two. I call them like Putinism and Trumpism. They're quite similar, and theologically, both are wrong to their own traditions that had produced them. They are inconsistent with their own traditions, and they can be deconstructed on the basis of their own tradition. And again, they should be deconstructed ecumenically with the input from different traditions.
Yeah, and that I think has been an interesting challenge, is finding Christians finding the space to speak into outside of their own tradition at the moment, right? And in these countries, like who is speaking most loudly on behalf of Christians, and how do others kind of respond to that? It's I found sort of a big challenge at the moment.
That's true. It seems we face the same sort of challenges for our own kind of civilization exceptionalisms in the very unhealthy sense of the word, and it's something that we can do together while addressing those challenges.
Yeah,
and that's what we are doing right now, isn't it?
That's right.
Indeed, that's what we're doing on this podcast. Do you think there's any challenge in the Orthodox side, because the Russian Orthodox Church seems somewhat detached from the other kinds of orthodoxy? It's one of the differences between the Eastern and the Western churches, is that Orthodoxy has seemed a little bit more divided along national lines for a long time. Does that cause further problems in trying to combat the specifically Russian form?
Yeah, absolutely right. It's a very good point that you, which is often not noticed outside the Orthodox world. But indeed, we had some kind of solidarity between the Orthodox churches, and we have a fellowship of the Orthodox churches. We have communion between the Orthodox churches, and we try to preserve this communion. And there are churches that really struggle to preserve it. But when you begin constructing exceptionalisms, you cannot stop. So you start with exempting yourself from the rest of the world, emphasizing the Orthodox civilization versus the Western civilizations, and then you can't stop. And then you keep fragmenting your own tradition, your own civilization, as it were. And that's what happened to the Russian church. They cannot stop, and they just ended up in, so far at least, in exempting the particularly Russian version of Orthodoxy among other Orthodoxies, and they call the rest like not quite Orthodox, and they call themselves the truly Orthodox, and we don't know where it will end. What will be the end of the road? But this is actually the thing about exceptionalism. Once you start practicing it, you can't stop until it consumes yourself.
Well, I'd hate to end on that slightly less hopeful note. Do you see
Well, it's
any
always hope.
hopeful resources from within Russian Orthodoxy then?
Yes, I believe so. Yes. Well, Russian Orthodoxy was not always bad, and it still has resources inside it, and it stems those resources stem from Orthodoxy itself. I believe the Orthodox tradition is super resourceful in dealing with these kind of challenges, and just like, for example, Lutheranism or indeed a Reformed tradition in Germany found resources to overcome Nazism. Yes, Lutheranism, in a sense, and Calvinism and Reformed tradition contributed to collaborating to the collaboration of the churches, German churches, with the Nazi regime. At the same time, the same tradition contributed to healing process, and I believe the same applies to the Orthodox tradition. So there is always hope, and I'm pretty sure. I'm like not 99%. I'm 100% sure that this healing process will happen sooner or later. But it will not happen on its own. It requires synergy. It requires collaboration between theologians, and church figures and people of faith to do it together.
We are participants in the saving grace of God.
Exactly.
Yes, that's a truly Orthodox way of thinking about it.
That's how we think about it, yes.
So thank you very much for your insights, Father Cyril. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to Faith at the Frontiers, a podcast that confronts challenges to the Christian faith with hope. If you liked this episode, then do subscribe to hear more like it in the future. For now, goodbye.